Sometimes when you're thinking about something, certain assumptions sneak in and they distort your thinking. And the assumptions can be so natural that you don't realize that they're there, and then you really have distorted thinking, you're not aware of it. I'm going to give you two examples where we insert those assumptions ourselves, just to show you that this is real. And then I'll show you important issues about which this actually applies. Here's a puzzle. You have 6 toothpicks, equal size. I want you to make, out of the 6 toothpicks, 4 triangles. Each triangle has as its sides whole toothpicks. Toothpicks don't cross anywhere. 4 triangles out of 6 toothpicks. Can you do it?
Break them.
No, because then each one won't have a whole toothpick as a side.
This.
That's 3. That's, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're right on top. You're using the sides to make another triangle.
You stack them.
What's that?
Oh,
Stack them.
you make a pyramid.
Okay, what about a pyramid?
You make a pyramid. Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
Make a triangle, and then take the other 3 toothpicks and put them up diagonally from the 3 points, and then you have 4 triangles.
Yeah.
Now, typically, you don't think of that because you think flat.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say it has to be flat. I didn't say it has to be 2-dimensional. You introduced that limitation on your own, and that caused you not to be able to solve it. If I had told you it doesn't have to be flat, you'd think it right away. You got it right away. Very good. Here's another one. These are fairly well known, so you might know it. Where's the... Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay.
Is that enough?
Yeah, that's enough. That's enough. Okay. Here you have... nine dots. The task is connect all the 9 dots with 4 straight lines without picking up your pencil. Put your pencil down and start to draw. But you get 4 lines and you got to cover all the dots without picking up your pencil. Think about that for a moment. Okay, you've seen it before?
Yeah.
Okay, then don't say anything. Let the other people think about it for a moment. Especially since you now have a hint that what's limiting you is that you've created an extra assumption in your minds and has eliminated some of the opportunities. I'm in the middle of giving a share. I'll have to speak to you later.
Can you just let them go with the pencil or keep going?
Those don't look like straight lines to me.
No, actually 4 straight lines. They go out the box. That's not it. And they all have to connect, no?
Well, the 4 straight lines have to run over each of the 9 dots.
Can you just go 1, 2, and 3? No?
But then you took your pencil off the page, didn't you?
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, I got you.
Okay, the point of the share is not this particular example, but I'll show you how it's done. Start here and go like this. Oh, keep going. Don't stay in the square. Keep going. Now you go like this. Now you go like this. And now you go like this. 4 lines, no picking up, but you went outside the square. I didn't say I have to stay inside the square. But when you think of the square, you think, oh, I got to this way, this way. You're holding yourself in. You're limiting yourself by an assumption that you made that wasn't stated in the problem. So this is a very interesting fact about the human mind. You hear something, you hear it in a context, and then you sort of take certain things for granted. Here's another example, and this one has an application to the theory of evolution. I have an object, and on one side of the object, I wrote an X. I'm telling you a story, and I threw this object into the air 3 times, and 3 times in a row, it landed on the X. And that happened by accident. It's not magnetized. It's not weighted on one side. It doesn't have ridges with the wind blowing through the ridges. It happened purely by accident that I threw it into the air, and 3 times in a row, it landed on the X. Do you believe me or not?
Yes.
Okay, so you believe me. Everybody agrees with him? You believe me? Did I perhaps leave something out of the description?
You said it landed on the X, meaning is it faced like the X is on the bottom?
That's right.
Or the X is on top?
It wouldn't matter if it's the same way 3 times. That shouldn't matter to your estimate as to whether you believe me or not. I meant face down. Maybe you're making an assumption here. I didn't tell you what the object was, did I?
You said a coin.
I did not say a coin. We have a recording. You can go back and play. I said an object. I did not say a coin. You just thought coin. Yeah, then it's 1 in 8, 12.5% probability. That's not unusual at all. Suppose it's a shiliagon with 1,000 sides. Would you believe me then? I don't think so. It's 1 in a trillion. If I don't tell you what the object is, what ought your attitude be if I don't tell you what the object is? I think what you should say is, well, I don't know how many sides it has. And since I don't know how many sides it is, I don't know what the probability is that you'll get it 3 times in a row, and therefore you haven't given me enough information to make up my mind whether to believe you or not. You've left out a key piece of information. Okay? We're on the same page? Okay, now let's look at evolution. Okay, yeah, you could spend 6 months trying to figure out what evolution says. And it has twists and turns. And there's all sorts of Rashi and Tosfos and Rambam and Rabbi Kiva, all sorts of and changing the concepts as you go along. It's a very complicated and confused, not to mention confusing, set of ideas. But here's a sketch that you'll find in all the presentations. Here's how evolution explains life. You start with something that makes copies of itself. Not a Xerox machine, that makes copies of the papers you put in. No, it makes copies of itself. It sort of runs around the world and looks for raw materials, and then after a while you find that it's not, you won't have 1 of them, you have 2. And then after a while you have 4, after a while you have 8. Right? Each one keeps making copies of itself. Now it's a pretty complicated thing if it makes copies of itself, that's right. And the copying procedure is really good, very good, but not perfect. Sometimes there are glitches. Sometimes the instructions aren't followed exactly, or sometimes something interferes with following the instructions. So not every attempt at a copy is perfect. Now, if something is very, very complicated and you make a mistake, probably that's going to make it worse, because every part depends upon every other part, they all interact. So let's say 1,000 mistakes take place, and of 1,000 mistakes, 999 make it worse. But 1 makes it better. Now imagine these things running around on the earth. So you got this one, it makes copies, more and more copies. Get to 1,000, well, one of them's got a glitch. So it'll just die. Okay, fine. But then, let's say 1 in 1,000 glitches actually improves it. So when you get to 1,000,000, and you've had 1,000 glitches, you'll get one that's better at making copies. It makes more durable copies. It can make copies out of less raw materials. It can make copies in a wider span of environments. Now you have competition. You got the old guys and the new guys. And the new guys are better at making copies. So after a while, there are going to be more new guys and more new guys. They're going to be competing for raw materials. And the new guys are going to win out until you get the new guy, because the new guys also, when they copy, 1 in 1,000 is a glitch, and 1 in 1,000 glitches is an improvement, and so you get an improvement. And that's the whole story. That's where you get giraffes from, and moss, and you get redwood trees, and you get bacteria and butterflies. Everything comes from just starting with something that makes copies, and eventually there are glitches, and some of the glitches make improvements, and that's the whole story. Okay? Yeah, there's selection which cuts them down and changes the environment. Okay, we know about that. Fine. So now we're being told that this process of copying with the glitches are uncontrolled, unmanaged, unsupervised. They happen, so to speak, by accident. Some people would use the word random, but the word random has 5 different definitions, so it doesn't really explain a lot. Now, somebody tells you something happens by accident. Remember the coin with the X? Somebody tells you something happens by accident, and he wants you to believe that this is how it happened. He owes you something. He owes you the probability that it'll happen by accident. If he doesn't tell you what the probability is, he hasn't given you enough information to make up your mind whether to believe him or not. So one question that ought to be asked in every textbook on biology, and isn't asked in even one, I'm sure, is, what is the probability that this story is true? And there isn't any. And there's a very, very good reason why you can't get one. I'll explain that in a moment. But at this point, and this is my challenge, you can write to your biology professors, you can write to your mathematics professors, you can write to your philosophy professors, get me an answer to this question. What is the probability that the story that they tell of evolution is true? I know negative answers, but the positive answer, just tell me what the probability is. And point out that if you can't answer that, how can you sell it as true? How can you sell it as known? How can you sell it as the only truth? And if you don't believe it, then you're either stupid or wicked, like Dawkins wanted to say. Since you don't have a probability. Now, why don't you have a probability? Well, let's think of mutations. Now, you have the DNA. I mean, no one knows what the first thing that's made copies of itself look like with some molecule. No one knows what it looks like. But let's say we're talking about with DNA, which mutates. And you have certain things in the environment which cause mutations. Maybe cosmic rays, and maybe heat can affect the DNA at certain times and places, or certain acids that it comes in contact with. And you got a particular gene, and you ask, what's the probability that this gene will change into this gene when the probability of being hit by a cosmic ray is such and such a probability, and so on. Well, we don't know the environment exactly. We don't know how many cosmic rays there are or were exactly. We don't know what all the factors that cause mutations exactly. And we have to do it for each place because the places of the DNA aren't equally accessible to be mutated. And you have to do it for each of tens of thousands of mutations. Each one has to have a probability, and then each one's probability can be multiplied, then you get the probability of doing the whole job. So that sounds like something, so we don't have enough information to assess those probabilities. So no one's going to give it to you. There could be arguments that it's impossible because you know of 2 things that have to be done, it will take too long. And there are arguments like that, but I'm not talking like that. I'm not talking about that now. I'm not talking proof that it's wrong. I'm talking simply, there's not enough reason to believe it's right because you're telling me something happened by accident and you can't give me a probability of it's happening by accident. With all the talk, with all the argumentation and propaganda and all the rest, this seems to me to be an extremely simple, fundamental question, and if you don't have the answer to that, you don't have a reason to believe it. Well, that's under the table. Nobody asks. I've been asking it for 30 years or more. It's recorded. I've challenged my students over and over again. Write to your professor. One fellow did write to his professor of biology. The answer he got back is, Rabbi Gottlieb is right. Okay? At least he was honest enough to agree. Not all honest. That's an example of sneaking something in, which is really quite important. Okay, now let's come closer to our types of thinking. You find arguments against the existence of God coming from science. What's his name? Peter van Inwagen, who is a very excellent philosopher, happens to be a very committed, believing Christian, who's done a lot of work in philosophy of religion, in addition to other fields, makes an extremely important logical point. How could you possibly have an argument from science against God? Science is talking about certain features of the physical world, and certain conditions and processes that it has, and explaining it. Religion is talking about God and creation and so forth and so on, all sorts of things. They're not talking about the same subject. It's sort of like saying that I have an argument from chemistry against how the stock market works. I don't think you do, because the subjects don't overlap. So Peter van Inwagen pointed out, the scientist, to make his argument against God, has to assume something about God. Otherwise, he can't talk about God in his context. And then you could ask him, well, where did you get that idea about God? I mean, did you make it up? Did you find it in some religious text somewhere or something? I mean, and if you don't, then he's shadowboxing. Like someone said to an atheist, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. That's not the God I'm talking about. So I'll give you the simple example, again, based on evolution. They'll tell you, these poor, either ignorant or lying professors, they'll tell you that there are vestigial organs. There are pieces of the human body and the animal bodies that don't do anything. They're just hanging around doing nothing, which means the body has to support them with energy, and the DNA has to program their development. And why do you have them? Because 100 million years ago, when your ancestor was a lizard, it was important for the lizard. And evolution just carries along what it has, makes improvements, little improvements, and as long as the package can survive, it brings along all the old stuff that even if some of the stuff doesn't really help, but if the package is successful enough in competition with other things, it'll survive along with the old stuff. So the appendix was supposed to be a vestigial organ. The eye is supposed to be badly designed because the optic nerve goes down through the eye and causes a little hole in the retina where you can't see, called the blind spot. Other creatures don't have that blind spot. The elbow is supposed to be very badly designed because of lifting weights. The angle in which you lift it makes it very difficult to lift weights. There are all sorts of mistakes in the way in which the body is designed. Mistakes. Well, to do the jobs that it does, it could have been designed better. Now, first of all, they don't know that. You tell an engineer, let's build this. An engineer will say, build a prototype and test it. I don't care what it looks like on paper. Things in the real world often don't do what you think they'll do on paper. If you don't make a prototype, don't start manufacturing. So the fact that you thought it up and you think it'll be better this way is a very poor reason to conclude that really it'll be better that way. Build a prototype and see if that's true. Furthermore, you got to build a prototype that can be developed in miniature in the womb and then grow from there, or develop some other way. You got to program how it's developed in the context of the development of the rest of the organism. Without that, you haven't got even something to think about. But let's suppose you suffice to do that. Why would you think that's an objection against God? What does it got to do with God? Well, here's how they fill it out. You tell me, says the scientist, you tell me that God is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-good, then everything he makes ought to be perfect. And it isn't perfect. It could be made better. Could be made better. Let's think about that. You see, I received in the mail a box. And on the cover of the box is it's a beautiful picture. So I assumed that inside there'll be a picture. Now they'll frame it. It's really a beautiful picture. It's very nice to have. I open it up. Some kid must have gotten to that beautiful picture with his scissors, because it's just a bunch of irregularly shaped parts. No picture there at all. What a loss. It's damaged. I'll sue the company. It's damaged goods and so forth and so on. They could have made it better. They could have made a whole picture. And then the manufacturer tells me, you're making a mistake. This is a picture puzzle. It's a puzzle to put together the pieces to make the picture. And it is a perfect picture puzzle. You thought it was imperfect. You thought it was damaged because you didn't know what its purpose was. Its purpose was to be made incomplete so that the guy who gets it can make it complete, because it's developmental for him to do that. Oh, it's a perfect picture puzzle. I thought it was supposed to be a picture. It really is a picture, but I didn't know the purpose for which these pieces were created. Okay, God is all-knowing, and God is all-powerful, and God is all-good. What is his purpose in creating the world? Do you know that? You're the scientist who's complaining about the appendix, and about the elbow, and about the eye. Do you know his purpose in doing that? No. So how could you draw any conclusions about the fact that the elbow could be engineered better to lift heavy weights, or the eye could be engineered better without a blind spot, which isn't true, but okay, even if he thought so. Or the digestive system could have been engineered better without an appendix. You don't know what the purpose is. And maybe one of the purposes God has in creating the world is to hide his presence. Because he wants people to operate without being confronted with God's presence all the time. People aren't supposed to be like angels. If you were confronted with God's presence all the time, there'd be no question of what you would do. Just like if somebody says, "Do you eat cheeseburger? I'll blow your brains out." Is that a hard choice? No. That's not why he put us here. So maybe God puts in what looks like imperfections into his work so that you won't have staring in your face all the time the perfection of God, so as to preserve a certain independence of free will. If that's his purpose, then you have no argument against God at all. So what Peter van Inwagen taught is that without inserting, without implying, without making use of an assumption about what God wants, what God's purposes are, you can't have any conflict between religion and science. And that being the case, the arguments fail unless you supply it. When you supply it, you find out often that it's incompetent. I'll give you another example. Poor Richard Dawkins, and by the way, just for the record, Richard Dawkins is not and was not a scientist ever. His appointment at Oxford was public knowledge of science. He's a science communicator. He's not a scientist. And he doesn't pretend about this, it's just people don't. He wrote a lot about science, so they assume he's a scientist. He isn't. Richard Dawkins made an argument like this. You have something that's complex, and you want to know where it came from. Well, the thing that makes it has to be at least as complex or more complex than the thing that made. Just imagine something that, let's say, a factory, set of machines to make a table. Well, they have to have a design of a table, stored someplace, plus what to do with the raw materials to make the table. It's going to be more complex than the table is. So now you want to explain the complexity of the world by saying God made it, but then if God made it, he's got to be more complex than the world is. And that being the case, if you're worried about explaining complexity, if in order to explain the complexity of the world, you invoke God to say, oh, now I know where this complexity came from, it came from God, you'll have to ask the same question about God. He's complex also, more complex. So wouldn't you have to ask where he came from And then wouldn't that be an endless regress? The whole project of explaining why the world is complex and why the world is designed by invoking a creator who created that complexity and design is an empty, worthless project. Because explaining the complexity and design by a designer that made it means you have to explain where he came from, and that lends you up an endless regress. Whew. And he calls that his master argument. Well, he's been roasted by philosophers because, when a person steps outside of his expertise, you can expect that there'll be weaknesses. Let's imagine some creature from outer space, some civilization from outer space, doing a survey of planets, and they, from a distance, observe what's going on planet Earth. And they observe various kinds of patterns of phenomena that they see. Could they infer that on planet Earth there are intelligent agents? Well, they see certain patterns, like, for example, wherever the sun doesn't get to, there are lights. And then, as the sun gets there, the lights turn off. Why is that? You don't have that on Mars. You don't have that on Jupiter. You don't have that on other planets. Why is it sort of coordinated with that? And then, if you do a thing with heat, they can sense heat. So certain areas are very hot, there's a less hot, and that the heat changes rapidly. Why is that? That doesn't happen on other planets. Couldn't they see enough about the planet to figure out that there must be intelligent agents on it? I'll ask you another question. This question was actually followed up. SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence. You probably heard of ET because they made a movie out of it, right? They're searching for intelligence elsewhere in the world. What are you searching for? Well, for example, if you got from a star light years away, you got radio waves which came in the form of beeps and were separated by silences, and then you count the number of beeps, and it turns out to be the decimal expansion of pi, you'd be very suspicious. That's a transcendental number. No natural process is going to produce that. Only intelligent agents produce that. Carl Sagan, the famous atheist philosopher, scientist, set up a whole program of searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. Isn't that based on the idea that if they do something, we could tell that it came from an intelligence? Why isn't Dawkins against all of that? You said an intelligent source produced that, but then that source has to be more complex than what it produced, and then you have to explain where that came from. So it's just a game, it has no validity whatsoever. Of course it does. Of course it does. I've correctly explained where the beeps of the decimal exponential pi came from. They came from an intelligence. Where did that intelligence come from? Interesting question. I don't know. But, why do I have to answer that? To conclude that, yes, this had an intelligence. Same thing with the one looking at Earth. He doesn't have to explain where we came from in order to infer that we're here doing this. So that's just a mistake. But worse than that, I have to ask Dawkins, you're talking about an argument against God. We believe that God created the universe, and you say, if there's a complex reality, and this created that complex reality, this has to be more complex than it. Where are you getting your ideas from? Computers? Or chemicals? That's all physical stuff, creating physical stuff. From our point of view, God isn't physical. From the point of view of our religion, God is ultimately simple. He's not complex at all. He has no complexity at all. And he created the world. Now, if you as a scientist have an argument that a non-physical creator can't be simple and create a complex world, let's hear it. Show me your experiments. Show me your theories. Show me your evidence. None of your scientific apparatus is going to tell against a non-physical creator. You may have other reasons against it. We'll be happy to hear them when you provide them. But your argument for complexity is just a non sequitur. You're not talking about God at all. How much do you think that God would be? That we think God is complex. Furthermore, this the Rambam writes already. He said, "Where did the world come from? God created it." Well, where did God come from? Answer: you only ask where something came from if it came. If it once wasn't, and then came into existence, then you can ask, where did it come from? But suppose you have something that never came, was always, is always, exists in and of itself. Since it never came, there's no point in asking where it came from, because it didn't come. So your clever question, which is supposed to undermine our position, is foolish. You're making an assumption that you can always ask where something came from. You can only do that if you have some reason to think that it came in the first place. So all of these arguments are based on making unwarranted assumptions about who God is, what God's purposes are, and then using physical reasoning or other types of reasoning to try to oppose the existence of such a God, without realizing that you're sneaking in suppositions about God that have no foundation whatsoever. I'll just mention a very bitter example, which needs much more explanation in other contexts I'm not going to go into now, but people say, how can you believe in God when you see the evil in the world? In particular, say, Holocaust or other types of man-made evil or even natural evil. How can you believe in that? One answer that I heard was, take out Deuteronomy 28 and read it. Nothing that happened in the Holocaust is worse than what's written in Deuteronomy 28. You ask me as a believing Jew, how can I believe in God if this thing happened? God himself predicts that things like that will happen. When you predict something and it comes true, that's not a good reason to disbelieve. Maybe you have complaints about the Jewish religion that would allow such things to happen. Maybe so. But that's a complaint about the morality of the Jewish religion. Not that it isn't true because it couldn't happen, because we wouldn't tolerate that in the conception of God. So again, without taking Deuteronomy into account, the critic assumes we wouldn't allow that to happen if we believed in God. And then we have an event in history which contradicts our belief. But it's not true. It doesn't contradict our yeah.
Right, what are you referring to Deuteronomy 28?
Deuteronomy 28 is called the Tochacha. That's where Kodesh Baruch Hu says, if you fail to live up to my Torah badly enough, the following calamity will take place. And it's a long description of terrible calamity. Not to mention, in the Vayikra, which is another such prediction, which has other features in it, and also things that are, frankly, horrifying. And that's the way our religion describes God as running the world. So, as I said, you then may have complaints against the morality of Judaism, and that's a separate issue, and it's been dealt with many times by many people. But surely that's no reason to say, because the assumption of the critic is, the God you believe in wouldn't allow that, would he? And my answer is, yes, he would, because he said so. So that can't be the argument. Again, it's because you sneak in a false assumption about God, and then I'll give you another one, which it's clearly prejudiced, but it is made by people under certain circumstances. There are certain people who have urges to do certain types of actions, and they claim that it can't be against God's will that they do those actions because those urges are so strong, and if they're denied, are so destructive to the person that God couldn't possibly, in his kindness and mercy have put a person in that circumstance. So it must be that it's okay with God if he obeys those urges. Like, for example, homosexuality. That's where that argument is made by many. Let's see. I wonder. There happens to be a condition which is possible under Jewish law and which, given Jewish history, must have happened sometimes, where a person cannot get married. Suffolk Mamzer. Cannot get married. And, of course, he's not allowed to have any other sexual outlet, and that's a condition according to Jewish law. But the sexual urge is so terrible, and if you don't have it, and so on and so on, I mean, all that's false psychology also, but leave that aside. So, and then some people will tell you about the other things that they do. I've heard this for adultery. But what are we going to do? She's married, she loves me, I love her, she can't get out of the marriage. Should we just suffer? The Torah's answer is, yes, you should just suffer. She can't get out of the marriage, that's why I said that, for whatever reason. Right? So yeah. Who said God promised you, a life of ice cream cones? Yeah, there is suffering in life. That's quite right. And suffering creates a challenge, and the challenge creates an opportunity. So this idea that it must be okay because it costs me too much to resist, and God wouldn't want me to suffer like that, that's, again, like Ben Inwagen said, that's an assumption about God, and then you draw your conclusion on the basis of your assumption about God. How about checking it out? Now, maybe there are religions that would agree with you. And maybe there aren't. Especially about adultery. I just saw a statement by someone who's running for Congress, I think in Texas. This is the way he reasons. He says, the Bible, and he's a Christian, the Bible never mentions abortion. Doesn't say anything about it. And we know that sometimes, women who are pregnant are really suffering the possibility of losing out on certain opportunities and so forth and so on. Shouldn't we feel for them? Doesn't God want us to feel for them and empathize with them and thereby, of course, enable them to kill their babies? I mean, yeah, right, they're babies. Babies inside the womb. Gee, I don't know. Seems to be a gap between the premise and the conclusion. And you're justifying killing the baby. Don't you need more than just silence? Maybe there are other principles like not killing human life. By the way, in Parshas Noach, which is part of their Bible also, it says pretty clearly, don't spill the blood of the blood that is inside a human. Now, the blood inside a human is a fetus, among other things. Dam b'damo lo shafech. So, this idea of, well, we have to be sympathetic, and we have to empathize, and therefore we have to kill the babies. That's just a way of creating a false assumption. At the very least, I'll tell you a story. I was traveling in England at the time when the Israeli government was bringing in Jews from Ethiopia. It was like 20 years ago. And I was traveling in the car. There was a professor of political science in the car. And she said to me, I don't understand you and the Israeli government. On the one hand, you have a whole program. You're spending money to bring these people in from Ethiopia because they're Jewish. And then the chief rabbinate says that they have to convert to Judaism. What kind of nonsense is that? Either they are Jewish or they aren't Jewish. So, since I'm aggressive logic, I have a chance to answer. And I said, actually there are three possibilities. Either we know they're Jewish, or we know they're not Jewish, or we don't know whether they're Jewish or not. Isn't that a third possibility? Now, what would you do if you don't know whether they're Jewish or not? Well, they might be Jewish, and if they might be Jewish, you don't want them to suffer in Ethiopia, so you take them out. But since they might not be Jewish, when they get here, we put them through a conversion procedure to make sure that in the end they'll be Jewish. Where's the contradiction? Gee, professor at a university. I guess it doesn't say much. Well, she didn't have an answer. Is that a hard problem? Was that a deep, clever solution? I mean, it's pretty much on the surface, I think. But if you're looking to throw bricks at people, as she was, obviously, wanted to throw a brick at Israel and Jews, so then all these things are based on sneaking in assumptions from the outside. I don't think there's a general way you could exercise your brain to avoid doing this and to avoid picking it up on other people. But when you know that it's a possibility, it's one of the things you look for. Where is there an extra assumption that I'm making? I'll finish this by giving you a riddle. George is a fellow who likes to do things unexpectedly. And one of the things he does is he goes to the train station and he takes the first train that'll come. Now, at this train station, there are northbound trains and southbound trains. Each train comes once an hour. And he takes them randomly. Whichever one comes first. And it turns out that 4 out of 5 times he goes north. How's that possible?
He goes on, sorry.
No, there's northbound trains and southbound trains. Northbound trains come once an hour. Southbound trains come once an hour. He comes into the station at random times. He takes the first train that comes. And it turns out, he keeps track. As a matter of fact, he ends up going north 4 out of 5 times. How is that possible? Both coming once an hour.
I mean, he just doesn't know he doesn't know the time he's coming. He's going around.
That's right, you're going random times. Sometimes he gets the north train, sometimes the south train, whichever one comes first. How could it be that 4 out of 5 times he goes north?
Train he gets on.
Say again?
Of the first train he gets on.
That's right. He took the first train that comes, he gets on.
If it's like the light rail here, he's getting on one side.
Oh, yeah. He's standing in here. Northbound goes this way, southbound goes this way, and he gets on the first one that comes.
Okay, the first one that comes, that's right, okay. How is it?
Maybe one day he just came on a different time.
What?
One day he just came on a different time.
Every day is different time. Every day is coming at a random time.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
It could be very.
How is it possible?
How is it possible that 4 out of 5 times he goes in one direction? Why isn't it closer to 50-50?
Could be at the even times, for example, it's like north, and at the odd times it's south, and he just.
What does that mean? Even times and odd times?
2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
I mean, they come once an hour. Each
I
one.
know, but no, once an hour per, like an hour for south and then an hour for north.
No. Every hour there's one northbound train and one southbound train.
He's standing on the opposite side all the time.
Even so, it's sometimes going one way, sometimes going the other
He
way.
goes with the first one that shows up. He shows
That's
up randomly, and whichever train comes first, he gets on.
Right. So on the 1 hour, 2
Yes.
trains come.
You're getting close. I didn't say anything about that, did I?
About what?
He asked, on the hour both trains come? Obviously not, because he gets on the first one that comes.
Right.
So what?
So I have to be with time. Or like.
Yeah, it has to do with time. Okay, good.
So it is
Now
random.
figure it out.
Has to do with time.
Let's suppose that one comes on the hour and the other one comes 12 minutes to the hour.
Right.
If he comes at 12:01 or 12:10 or 12:15 or 12:20 or 12:25 or 12:30, 35, 45, right? All those possibilities, he's going to get the northbound train, which goes at 12 minutes to 2. To get the southbound train, he's got to come between 12 minutes to 2 and 2, which is only 1/5 of the amount of time.
So that-
I didn't tell you when they come. They're not equally spaced. It's not on the hour and the half hour.
Right.
And that being the case, naturally. So here's an example where, you see, when I first heard this, I thought, everything's symmetrical, that can't be right. There's got to be something that makes a difference. So I started thinking, where's the difference going to be? And I came to your conclusion. I wasn't told when they come, I just told how often they come. Now I can play with when they come, then the solution falls out.
So the window is small for when it
That's right. One has a small window, the other has a gigantic window. That's why.
Oh, yeah.
Wrote here.